right, thank you. We'll get started here. Okay, so as I've already said, I'm talking a bit about like my personal journey and using ER for my own language acquisition and kind of how that's affected how I've gone about learning languages and a little bit how I've maybe implemented that in my teaching. And so my main motivation for this was when I came last year to the conference, I didn't see too many much in the way of like people's personal experiences with extensive reading. A lot of it's like, how to implement it in schools or some of the research behind it, but not so much like what it's actually like to acquire a language through using this. And so I thought I would kind of talk about my experience. That was how I first got introduced to it. And this is kind of geared more towards maybe other teachers that to kind of better understand what their students might be going through and kind of where areas that kind of really helped motivated me and I did well, and other areas where I kind of like faltered. So hopefully you can kind of help your students a little bit more with that. So I'll talk a little bit about how I got into ER and I kind of had a false start with it, how I managed to use it to improve my Chinese and in the areas where I had difficulties. So just a little bit background from me. So I'm from the US and English is my first language. I've learned a few of the languages. I previously lived in Germany, Iceland, and Finland. So I achieved a high level of German. My Icelandic and Finnish was, I could get by day to day without too many difficulties. Then I came to Taiwan 7 years ago, and Mandarin is the lingua franca here, even though there's quite a few languages. But I've really struggled with trying to make headway in Mandarin. And what I did in like maybe a year and a half, 2 years in like Iceland and Finland is taken me, like 4 or 5 years to get to, actually now about 7 years in Taiwan. And so in addition to that, I actually had over 100 hours of one-on-one online instruction through TutorMe. It was they had the same parent company that I was working for. So as a benefit, I got the free classes. And a lot of that was a lot of kind of just like rote memorization and, grammar structures with missing words, and you just kind of fill it in, a lot of kind of behaviorism. But despite having all those hours and times and using flashcards, I still failed to communicate in my daily life. I do speak English mostly at work and at home with my family, but when it comes to buying food, going to the doctors, those things, I have to use Chinese there. And a lot of times communication broke down. I just really could not understand what people were saying, and I couldn't get my ideas out either. And it was just getting really, really more frustrating. So so I'll talk a little bit about my experience. And I first came across the Mandarin Companion books, and I saw this one called My Teacher is a Martian. So I looked into this, and they have a couple different couple levels. The lowest one starting with 150 characters. Level 1 is about 7 books with 300 and 4 books with 450. At the time, there was only a simplified version of this book. And so I decided to try reading it, even though I'm in Taiwan, so we have traditional characters. I thought, well, it'll be good to learn, but I still found that quite difficult because so many characters, I didn't know the simplified version of them. And I still struggled to understand what was happening. So just to give it one a little bit, show what Mandarin Companion is like. This is kind of like the inside of the book. This is the simplified version. So it does have like some really nice pictures, very clear layout. It's got, underline of any new vocabulary outside the 150 characters. And of course, it's got the pinyin and the English down here at the bottom and a number connected to it. So later in the chapter, if I see it and I can't remember it, I can just go back to take a look. There's vocab glossaries in the back of the book. Additionally, there's actually, for each chapter is broken down what grammar points are commonly found in that chapter. And they have links online directly to the grammar points. And you can kind of read them, how they work, like more of the syntax, a little bit of the more morphology as well. So that really helped them be able to make the input much more comprehensible. And like for the beginner levels, it's about 50 pages. So it's a decent sized little story that you have to kind of keep in your head. And so they go to about 10 chapters. So when I first started, I'd read it and I was struggling with it, didn't get past a couple chapters. so I just kind of put it away. Later, I came across this book, English Fever by Stephen Krashen, and he wrote it kind of more for Taiwan and kind of what he imagined English education could be in Taiwan to help improve English. And my teaching experience at that time was mostly based around like behaviorism and a lot of output teaching as well. And so I knew about input, but this kind of really broke down to me the importance of input, first introduced me to extensive reading and silent sustained reading. And so after reading that, so I decided to give extensive reading a try, go back and use the book. But now that I better understood how it works and what the benefits are, that kind of motivated me much more. So that was kind of like the first challenge, was definitely trying it again. It was definitely then, in the meantime, they released a traditional Chinese version. It was much easier since I knew a lot of the characters. However, I still found it difficult. I had to read the grammar explanations to really kind of make sense. I hadn't done much reading beyond small passages in my textbook or the few sentences from the online teaching. And so what I did to kind of do about it, I had 5 weeks off in summer. So I thought, okay, I've got time. No one's at home. I've got no excuse not to put every effort into learning this. So I would read a page and kind of do it for character recognition, read a little bit slowly to really understand every part, and then kind of read it again. And I also, each day I picked up the book, I reread the previous chapter. And occasionally I caught some meanings that I kind of missed before. So okay, yeah. So I still needed clarifications on a number of these sentences. So luckily I'm married to a local, so I was able to ask, okay, what does this mean? And sometimes using Google Translate, because even though I knew all the characters, I still couldn't make sense of some of the sentences. And I kind of had to repeat them again and again. And it felt more like work and studying and not this, free, having fun reading. And I'm an avid reader in general, but this was not fun. It was work. And I didn't really notice too much in the way of improvement. However, I did finally have my eureka moment. It took me about 5 weeks to get through chapters 1 through 5. But once I hit chapter 6, I seemed to have acquired the grammar, most of the grammar and vocabulary needed. And then I sped through it and I finished the remaining 5 chapters in 3 days. So at that point, it finally became fun and easy, and I was able to just sit down and read. Didn't have to do the repeats again and again. Didn't have to look up any of the words of the grammar. It was really, really enjoyable. And then I quickly read through the remaining 3 books in that level. So some of the things that I noticed that just from reading that first level was my improved comprehension as well as my speaking. So here I have some of the troublesome grammatical structures in Chinese. Like, for example, they'll say like A and B and then followed by a verb. They don't always use verbs at the end, so I had a hard time kind of keeping that in my head. And they drop their subjects quite often, and like they put the words like when at the very end. And I'd learned all this explicitly, but when I was like doing natural productions trying to speak, of course I was kind of defaulting to English syntax. But after going through that first book and some of the others, my daily life, the input got better. So I remember being at the hospital and watching a woman kind of explain something to a patient, and she said this phrase, "lai de shihou," which is just, in the context is like, when you come back. It literally just means come when. So it's a little bit different than what they would have taught in the book because they dropped some of the other words for it. But I was able to understand little bits and pieces of these conversations where it's previously I had never heard this spoken before. But after acquiring it from the book reading, it now suddenly made my daily life just a little bit more comprehensible. I said, and same with speaking. I noticed that I was not doing it perfectly, but these constructions came a little bit more easier when I was trying to speak. One big improvement I noticed was reading menus. This is kind of like what a typical Taiwanese menu looks like. It's got the names of the dishes and price, and you put a check mark on it. And my reading at that time was very much just character by character and translation. So I'd look here and be like, okay, there's ocean, okay, there's fresh, don't know, okay, there's the word for food. And it was a long process to try to figure out what the food was. But within reading these couple of books, I noticed my scanning improved quite a bit. I was able to look at a menu like this, and immediately my eyes would just kind of go, oh, okay, those are noodles. There's the soup, and okay, I've got some sort of, there's a vegetable meat noodles, and oh, there's some sort of egg soup. So my brain stopped actually looking at each individual character and looking at the characters I didn't know, and instead it just focused on processing those that I did know. So that was a really exciting thing for me that kind of also kept the motivation going. So I could just look at a whole menu and I could order now in a fraction of the time that it took previously. The next challenge I had was actually moving to the next level. So then going up to level 1, which uses 300 characters. They were definitely much more interesting titles. A lot of them are retelling English classics. So there's like Rip Van Winkle, Emma, Sherlock Holmes, but they used Chinese names, and they took place in China. And these are a little bit longer. They're about 70 pages, and they have, of course, a whole new set of grammar and vocab. And my experience with doing the level was same as starting for the first time. It went back to being work. I just could not just read through everything quickly. I had to just take it slow, read a page, go sentence by sentence, make sure I understood the meanings before moving on. And the process followed the exact same as the first one. I got the first 5 chapters was slow going. Took me another few weeks. Once I hit chapter 6, this book actually has 12 chapters. Once I hit chapter 6, it suddenly picked up, got easy, and I flew through it in a couple of days. And I also have read the remaining 6 books in that level. And I found myself even being able to read at night, just right before bed, because I got rid of the work part of it. It was just purely enjoyable stories. And with that, I noticed after this part, my production greatly improved. And so this was a writing thing I had done for a website before I started ER reading. And I also did one afterwards. So this one is kind of the original. Don't worry if you don't speak Chinese, but it's only got 121 characters, and it was a basic introduction. It's where I'm from and some of my hobbies. And I remember it taking me about 20 minutes to write. And I was mostly thinking in English and then trying to apply the explicit grammar I had learned to make it better. And I had to use a dictionary for a number of phrases. But after reading 2 or 3 of the level 1 books, I decided just to kind of do a summary of the book, the Rip Van Winkle one. And you might notice immediately this is a little bit longer. So I managed to write about 210 characters. And I wrote this in 5 minutes. And I did it entirely thinking in Chinese. I didn't even have to use English. And I'm still a beginner at this point in Chinese, or maybe a high beginner. But I was definitely able to use more complex and accurate grammar and vocab. It wasn't perfect. I had a few people find a few mistakes, but I also didn't need to use a dictionary. I could just remember the vocab from the reading. What I also noticed from this was that my parsing got better. And so for those that don't know, it's Chinese makes it hard because there's no spaces between words. So when I get a character like this, Tong, by itself means east, but it can also be a part of a compound word like Dongxi, which has absolutely nothing to do with the meaning whatsoever, which actually means something. So I struggled with reading sentences and advertisements and never knowing if this character that I saw was the one that I knew, or is it part of a compound word that I still didn't know yet. But within a short amount of time, what that allowed my brain is to kind of build the implicit grammar. So when I started reading sentences, my brain could immediately spot, okay, what area was missing, and I could better judge, okay, these characters definitely belong together. Chinese has single, double, triple, I think even quadruple syllable compounds for words. So that definitely made the reading part a lot more easier to get through, and I could better understand what I was reading. Additionally, I was taking a Chinese class, and I ended up getting 97% on my Chinese exam. And I missed the last month of the class because my partner was in the hospital. So I didn't have a chance to do any studying, but I was still reading at the time. And I was able to do the exam and do it on feeling, primarily, at least when it came to the grammar and constructions. And I did really well. So that was the best score that I had gotten out of the 3 semesters at that university. The next challenge that I had was moving to a different reader, but trying to stay at the same level, because there's not too much that I could, too many graded readers I could find in Chinese, and even less in simplified Chinese. So I'm trying my best to make the use of what I can find. And so I came across this one, which is The Lady in the Painting. I think it's an older one that they kind of re-released, but it's got a different writing style. Some of the grammar they use is a little bit different. The layouts are different. As you can see, the pictures look more like in this one, and the print is not quite as clear and concise as the other ones. So just the whole layout and the difference made it a little bit harder to read, as well as have a lot of other new characters that I hadn't seen before. And even there's a couple of like older, like this one right here. I think this is an old version of Li, which really isn't used much more in Taiwan, at least. So I found that, again, really, really difficult, even though I hadn't actually changed levels this time. It was just a different style. So what's happened with that one is, as happens previously, life sometimes gets in the way with full-time job and studies and family. But this time I didn't go back because it was too much work. I was having a hard time getting used to it. And I said, okay, I'll go back to it when things kind of calm down, when I have less time. But then as more time passes, of course, it gets harder to restart. I think, well, maybe I've forgotten a lot of stuff. I should go back and reread some of the old readers, but kind of don't really want to. And as it happens now, I haven't read Chinese or done any graded readers for the last 5 months. So I need to pick it back up again and then move on to the further levels. So those are some of the difficulties and challenges that that I faced with doing these. So that every time that the level changed, it was different, and even changing the different companies can be difficult. But I made a lot of gains with this, and it really kind of opened my eyes to extensive reading and trying to get lots of input. And so that's also influenced other areas of my life. So such as with, even with advanced, like my German is quite advanced. But I mentioned before to someone else earlier that when it comes to nonfiction stuff, I don't have any issue reading the native speaker design stuff. But when it came to fiction, which I enjoy reading, really struggled with so many vocabulary words I hadn't come across before. So I've tried my best to apply the 98% comprehension to L1 German novels. And luckily with Amazon, I can get some sample pages and I can kind of see if it fits. The problem is it takes a lot of time to go through, find different novels that look interesting, and then realize, okay, no, they may be a little bit too difficult for you. But in addition to that, I started adding like subtitles to like movies and the TV shows that I was watching. Before I was thinking, well, I shouldn't be using this because maybe my listening will be better without the subtitles. But I thought, you know what, now that with the extensive reading and I can understand 98% of almost every TV show I watch, keep the subtitles on, I am learning. And I've moved that over into doing more extensive listening and intensive, extensive viewing. So in the Mandarin Companion series, they have all of their stories on Audible. So I've been kind of, I listen to those, might read along sometimes, as well as one good thing is YouTube. If you type in whatever language you're learning and TPRS, which I think is teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, I found like lots of short videos and stories and some cultural stuff done all entirely in the target language, made comprehensible, where I'm getting that 95, 98% comprehension. So I've been able to branch out into a few other areas to improve the best I can with what I can. And like with the other languages I learned, like Finnish is a language I've always wanted to master, never quite did, but now I have a goal of, well, maybe my goal is I get to the point where I can read more in Finnish. Even if I get to an advanced level, doesn't matter, but at least I can enjoy stories written in a new language. So my main takeaway from this, I said, was to kind of let some, mostly teachers know what are some of the benefits, that letting your students know the benefits would greatly help. I think one of the other, someone else mentioned that yesterday as well. I said, once I found out the benefits and how it worked, it kept my motivation up. And also that reading will be hard in the beginning when they're first starting. So of course, also take any suggestions on like how we can help our students go through that first bump if they are doing it. And like changing books and levels and publishers can also slow down and frustrate the readers. And my last thing is, for many languages, I said, there's been an issue with Mandarin Chinese, and I've heard people talk like there's not as much with, say, like Hindi or others. So I would encourage anyone else who speaks another language to try to write as many graded readers in your own languages and to get that word out, because there's many people who probably would want to do this, but it seems like the market is mostly just English. Right, that's all I have for today. So thank you very much. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'll gladly answer those.
Thank you, Tyler.
Yes, everyone, let's give Taylor a round of applause for that. And I'm going to turn off the live stream.